The hall was electric before the first word was even spoken, cameras snapping like lightning across a dark sky. The moderator's voice was steady, almost ceremonial, as they delivered the opening question. But before the last syllable could settle, Kamala Harris leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a mix of confidence and challenge. "Karoline," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Your generation doesn't understand governance. Leave it to the adults. Hit subscribe before we start an amazing story." A wave of sound broke over the room. Gasps, murmurs, a few stifled laughs from the front rows. The remark landed with a thud, but it wasn't just the words, it was the smirk that followed, the slow, deliberate shake of her head, the unspoken suggestion that the young challenger sitting across from her had no right to share the stage. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to freeze. The camera operators instinctively zoomed in on Karoline Leavitt's face, searching for a crack, a flinch, anything that would show the blow had landed. But she didn't blink. Her expression was carved from calm determination, her hands folded neatly on the podium. The crowd's restless murmurs seemed to hang in the air, as if the entire nation was holding its breath. The moderators exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't just a jab. It was the first real strike of the night, and everyone knew it. Somewhere in the audience, a supporter leaned forward, whispering under their breath, "Say something," but Karoline didn't rush. Instead, she let the silence grow heavy, as if daring Harris to fill it. The hall's energy shifted, tension rising, anticipation stretching to a razor's edge. And then, just before the moderator could speak again, Karoline drew in a slow, deliberate breath. The faintest glint of resolve flashed in her eyes, and the cameras caught at a spark that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this moment. What happened next made the entire nation sit forward. This wasn't just another night on the campaign trail. This was a rare spectacle. Two women on opposite ends of America's political spectrum, standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the hot lights, each claiming to represent the future. The stakes were higher than ever. For Kamala Harris, this was a chance to cement her role as the seasoned stateswoman, the steady hand guiding the country through turbulent times. For Karoline Leavitt, it was the fight of her life. A moment to prove that youth, conviction, and courage could rival the weight of Washington experience. Harris knew the optics were on her side. She had spent years in this arena, from Senate hearings to vice presidential debates, wielding her sharp tongue and trademark composure like a weapon. And tonight, she went on the offensive early. Her opening jab wasn't just about policy. It was about image, an attempt to paint Karoline as naive and eager upstart who had stepped into a league she wasn't ready for. "Experience matters," Harris continued, her tone deliberately patient, almost patronizing. "We're talking about global crises, national security, real decisions that affect millions of lives. This isn't a college seminar. This is the real world." The words echoed in the hall. Some in the crowd nodded, but many shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The comment stung, not because it was cutting, but because it reflected a long-standing tension in American politics. The belief that younger voices must wait their turn, that power is a privilege granted slowly, not seized with urgency. Karoline stood silently, her posture straight, her hands still. For those watching closely, there was a quiet power in that pause, the kind of discipline you only find in someone who has been underestimated before. Every second she stayed calm, every beat of silence, transformed Harris's attack into background noise. And across the country, in living rooms and watch parties, the audience felt it. Social media feeds lit up with posts. Is she really going to let that slide? She better answer this. This is the moment. Because this wasn't just a clash of policies. This was a clash of eras. One woman represented the well-oiled machinery of establishment politics, a career carved through careful calculation. The other stood for disruption, for a generation unwilling to be sidelined while decisions were made over their heads. And as the cameras rolled, millions watching at home had no idea they were about to witness the turning point of the entire debate season. To understand the weight of Kamala Harris's words that night, you had to understand the arc of her career. A story that had made her both a trailblazer and a lightning rod. Rising from San Francisco's district attorney's office to the Senate, She built her reputation as a relentless prosecutor, quick with a cross-examination and unafraid to corner her opponents. On the national stage, she became known for her sharp debate moments. Those viral clips where she dismantled rivals with precision, her laughter and pointed retorts winning over crowds who craved a fighter. That reputation followed her into the vice presidency. Harris cultivated an image of the no-nonsense operator, the one who could hold her own in any room. For years, she had been praised for her ability to strike at her opponent's weaknesses, to make them stumble under pressure. In a country where politics is often theater, Harris had been a star performer, confident, quick, and charismatic. But with that confidence came a shadow that critics never let her forget. There were moments, they argued, when her strength slipped into condescension, when her quick laughter felt like a dismissal rather than a rebuttal. Clips circulated of her cutting off challengers, shaking her head at reporters, or laughing in the middle of tough questions, moments that became fodder for those who painted her as out of touch. And yet, Harris leaned into the persona. This was her arena, a stage where she could prove once again that she was the adult in the room, the one with the gravitas to handle crises that a younger challenger could never imagine. Her strategy was clear. Paint Karoline Leavitt as too green, too inexperienced, someone who might speak passionately but lacked the hard-won wisdom of governing. As she spoke, Harris's voice carried that familiar cadence, confident, steady, with a hint of incredulity, as though the very idea of sharing the stage with her opponent was almost amusing. You have to know what it's like to be in the situation room when the decisions aren't just about policy but about lives, she said, her words deliberate, her hands slicing the air for emphasis. To her supporters, this was vintage Kamala, sharp, commanding, unwilling to yield. But to others in the audience, there was a subtle shift. The line between strength and dismissal was starting to blur. The longer she spoke, the more it felt like she was lecturing, like she was reminding not just Karoline but every young viewer watching that this was not their time. And for a generation that had grown tired of waiting, that tone landed differently than it might have 4 years ago. Social media began buzzing again, some praising Harris for her assertiveness, others calling the exchange patronizing. "This isn't leadership," one viewer tweeted. "It's gatekeeping." Still, Harris pressed on, confident in her footing. She had faced tougher opponents than this, and her track record said she could land the blow that would end a challenger's momentum before it began. Every sentence was delivered like a closing argument, methodical, final, leaving no room for interruption. But what Harris didn't see, or perhaps didn't want to see, was the quiet resolve forming across the stage. Karoline's stillness was no accident. It was the calm before the counterpunch. And in that silence, the audience felt the tension shift, the center of gravity moving ever so slightly away from Harris's lectern. Because in politics, as in theater, confidence can turn to overconfidence in an instant. And when that moment comes, the audience is ready for something or someone to break the script. What Harris couldn't have known was that her next exchange wouldn't just continue the debate. It would flip it entirely, setting the stage for one of the most replayed moments in political media this year. Karoline Leavitt hadn't stepped onto that debate stage by accident. Her journey began far from the marble halls of Washington, in a small New Hampshire town where politics felt distant and power was something that existed somewhere else. Her parents worked long hours, her family was tight-knit, and from an early age she was taught that the measure of a person was not in the titles they held but in the work they put in when no one was watching. As a teenager, Karoline was drawn to public service not because it was glamorous, but because it mattered. She watched friends' families struggle to keep small businesses afloat, saw neighbors burdened by decisions made in distant state capitals, and she began to wonder why the people most affected by those decisions seemed to have the smallest voice in them. She was young when she got her first taste of politics, volunteering for campaigns, stuffing envelopes, knocking on doors. She learned quickly that change didn't come easy, that every yard sign and every phone call was part of a bigger fight to be heard. Those early experiences hardened her resolve, taught her that leadership wasn't about waiting your turn. It was about showing up even when people said you didn't belong. By the time she entered her 20s, Karoline had already worked in the White House press office, gaining a front-row seat to the machinery of power. It was there she saw up close how narratives were shaped, how quickly the media could crown winners and losers, and how little patience Washington had for those who refused to play by its rules. Many would have been intimidated, content to stay behind the scenes, but Karoline walked away with a different conviction. She wouldn't just watch history happen, she would be part of it. That conviction fueled her first campaign for Congress. Commentators called her too young, too inexperienced. They questioned her seriousness, her staying power. She was mocked, underestimated, told to wait her turn, but she kept showing up. She went door to door, town to town, listening more than she spoke, earning the trust of voters who saw in her someone who wasn't jaded, someone who still believed politics could serve ordinary people. By the time she won her seat, Karoline had learned how to take a punch, from political opponents, from the media, even from within her own party. Every attack only strengthened her sense of mission. She understood that her very presence in these spaces was disruptive, and that disruption was the point. So when she stepped onto the debate stage opposite Kamala Harris, she carried more than talking points. She carried the weight of every young voter who had been told they were too idealistic, every immigrant family who felt invisible in national conversations, every working-class household that wondered if Washington even remembered they existed. And as Harris launched her dismissive jab, Karoline didn't flinch because she had heard it all before. From party elders, from pundits, from opponents who had tried to define her before she could define herself. Her silence wasn't hesitation. It was preparation. In that moment, she became the vessel for something bigger than herself. She wasn't just Karoline Leavitt, Congresswoman. She was every voice that had been talked over, every citizen who had been told to sit down and wait their turn. And she knew that if she handled this moment right, it could ignite something far beyond the walls of that debate hall. Now hit subscribe. The cameras caught at the steel in her eyes, the faintest curl of a smile that suggested she wasn't just ready to answer. She was ready to turn the night on its head. The next words out of her mouth would not only answer Kamala Harris, they would reframe the entire conversation. And as she prepared to speak, the audience seemed to sense it too. A hush fell over the hall, the kind of silence that precedes an unforgettable moment. What came next would not only define this debate, but set off a chain reaction that no one, not the moderators, not the campaign strategists, not even Karoline herself could have fully predicated. The moderator cleared their throat, trying to regain control of the room, but the energy had shifted. Harris, sensing an opportunity to press her advantage, leaned in once more. Her voice was measured but edged with steel. "Karoline," she said, "it's not just about passion. It's about knowing what you're doing. You can't run a country on tweets and talking points." The audience reacted with a mix of polite applause and low murmurs. Some nodded approvingly, but others frowned, as if Harris's words had gone too far. The tension was building like a storm cloud over the stage, the air thick with anticipation. Karoline's fingers rested lightly on the podium, but her posture was unshaken. She let the applause die down before raising her chin ever so slightly. The silence stretched long enough that cameras caught Harris glancing toward the moderator, almost impatient. When Karoline finally spoke, it was with deliberate calm. "Madam Vice President," she said, her voice clear, "I respect the experience you bring to this stage, but experience is not a free pass to dismiss an entire generation." A ripple ran through the hall, the kind of low, charged murmur that meant the audience was paying attention now. Harris's smile faltered just slightly. The moderator tried to pivot to policy, but Harris wasn't finished. She jumped back in, more animated this time. "I'm not dismissing anyone," she insisted, her voice rising half a pitch. "But when you sit in that chair, when you see the intelligence briefings, when you make life and death decisions, it changes you. And with all due respect, you have never had to do that." It was meant to be definitive, the final word on the matter. But instead of looking cornered, Karoline almost looked energized. Her eyes locked on Harris, her lips pressed together as if holding back the response she'd been crafting since the first jab. The audience sensed it too. The hush that fell over the hall was deafening. It wasn't just silence. It was expectation. Across the country, on living room couches and phones held inches from faces, viewers leaned in closer. Social media posts began flooding in, She's about to answer. This is it. And then Karoline drew in a steady breath, her expression softening into something almost disarmingly calm. The stage lights caught the edge of her hair, her shoulders squared, and she leaned into the microphone. The room seemed to hold its breath, every camera tightening its frame on her face. And then, with one sentence, Karoline turned the entire hall upside down. Karoline's voice, when it finally came, was not loud or hurried. It was calm, almost quiet, the kind of tone that made people lean closer to catch every word. "Madam Vice President," she began, her eyes fixed steadily on Harris. "You're right. I have never sat in the Situation Room. I have never been Vice President. But you know what I have done? I've sat in diners with single mothers who are choosing between rent and groceries. I've stood with small business owners who are hanging closing soon signs because of policies written in offices far away from where they live. And I've talked to young people who are told to wait their turn, to be quiet, to stop caring because someone else will handle it for them." A murmur swept across the audience, a subtle shift, as though something deep within the room had just cracked open. Karoline didn't stop. She leaned in slightly, her tone firming. "Experience matters. But so does accountability. So does listening. And for far too long, Washington has had experience without accountability. That's why I'm here tonight. Because my generation isn't going to wait 30 years to be taken seriously. We're here now and we're ready to lead." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing louder, rolling through the hall like a wave. Even the moderators couldn't hide the flicker of surprise on their faces. Harris shifted slightly, her trademark smile appearing and disappearing like a reflex, but Karoline wasn't finished. She paused just long enough for the applause to subside, then delivered the blow that would define the night. "And Madam Vice President," she said, her voice like a scalpel. "With all due respect, if decades of experience have brought us to record inflation, rising crime, and global crises that you still can't solve, maybe the problem isn't that I'm too young. Maybe the problem is that Washington has been doing it the same way for too long." This time the hall erupted. Gasps, cheers, even a few shouts rang out as cameras flashed wildly. The moderators tried to calm the room, but the energy was impossible to contain. Viewers at home were already clipping the moment, posting it with captions like "She just ended the debate. Hit subscribe so we proceed next." Karoline held her ground, not smiling, not gloating. She simply let the words hang in the air like a challenge no one could ignore. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was powerful. Harris opened her mouth as if to respond, but the audience reaction had shifted. Every move she made now felt defensive, like someone trying to regain footing after being knocked back. Her reply was measured, even polite, but it lacked the sharpness of her earlier jabs. The momentum had swung, and everyone watching knew it. Karoline used the next question to drive the point home, pivoting smoothly to policy, outlining concrete ideas on cost of living, education, and security. Each answer landed with more weight now, buoyed by the dramatic reversal moments before. And as she spoke, the camera caught faces in the crowd. Heads nodding, expressions softening. Even some of Harris's supporters appearing to wrestle with what they had just heard. The final exchange of the segment sealed the moment. Harris attempted a light-hearted quip to defuse the tension, but it fell flat, met with polite chuckles rather than applause. Karoline responded with a measured closing line. "This debate isn't about who's been here longest. It's about who's willing to fight hardest for the people who can't be in this room tonight." The hall went still again before erupting into sustained applause. Across the country, newsrooms were already queuing up the clip. Twitter and TikTok exploded with edits, reactions, and hashtags. Hashtag Leavitt moment, hashtag debate game changer, hashtag respect your turn. Commentators were calling it a political lightning strike, the kind of moment that transcends the usual partisan lines. Harris adjusted her microphone, nodded slightly, and smiled the practiced smile of someone who knows the moment belongs to someone else. And as the moderators moved the debate to the next topic, the question wasn't whether Karoline had just won the exchange. It was how far the shockwaves would travel once the sun came up. Because what had just happened wasn't merely a rebuttal. It was a generational declaration. And by the time the night was over, millions would be talking about it. What came after would prove that this moment was not an isolated flash, but the spark that would ignite a conversation stretching far beyond that debate stage. The debate wasn't even over before the moment went viral. Within minutes, clips of Karoline's counterattack flooded social media feeds. TikTok videos with bold captions, "She just shut down Kamala Harris," racked up thousands of views before the moderators could even ask the next question. On Twitter, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Leavitt moment shot to the top of trending lists, followed by hashtag debate game changer and hashtag respect your turn. Newsrooms scrambled to rewrite headlines. Producers whispered into anchors' earpieces, signaling that they had just found the clip that would dominate the evening cycle. CNN ran a live cheer-in. Leavitt fires back at Harris. Debate hall erupts. Fox News played the clip on repeat, labeling it the knockout exchange. Even late-night comedians, quick to seize a cultural moment, tweeted about the takedown before their writers had gone home. But the reaction wasn't just digital. Outside the debate hall, the crowd that had gathered to watch on giant screens was buzzing with energy. Supporters who had arrived lukewarm were suddenly electrified, strangers high-fiving, phones held aloft to replay the moment in real time. She didn't just hold her own, one viewer told a local reporter. She flipped the entire thing. In living rooms across the country, immigrant families and young voters felt an unfamiliar rush validation. Karoline hadn't just answered an insult. She had answered years of being dismissed, of being told that they didn't yet have the experience to shape the nation's future. In that single moment, she had turned condescension into a rallying cry. Commentators across the political spectrum began to weigh in. Some praised Harris for taking the exchange with grace, but many admitted that Karoline had shifted the energy of the debate. This was a passing of the torch moment. One analyst said on a primetime panel, "You could feel the crowd decide that her voice belonged on this stage." The ripple effect reached beyond the pundits. Within hours, fundraising numbers for Karoline's campaign spiked. Small donations poured in from every state, many accompanied by messages like, "For my kids," and "For the future." Memes celebrating the moment appeared across Instagram and Reddit, showing Karoline with captions like, "Experience is overrated," and "The future just spoke." And while Harris's team attempted to regain control of the narrative, the clip kept circulating. Millions of views, countless shares, endless commentary. Each replay cemented the perception that this was not just another debate night, but a cultural turning point. By morning, newspaper headlines echoed the online chatter. The Washington Post called it, "The exchange heard round the country." Politico ran a feature titled, "How Karoline Leavitt Won the Night." Even outlets critical of her policies admitted that she had dominated the moment with composure and precision. The shift was undeniable. For Karoline's supporters, the exchange became proof that their generation could stand toe-to-toe with the establishment and win. For undecided voters, it was the first time many had considered her a serious contender. And for critics, it was a wake-up call. The challenger they had dismissed as too young had just commanded the national spotlight. But this was only the beginning. As the sun rose the next day, the conversation had moved from the debate hall to the streets, to classrooms, to workplaces. People weren't just replaying what she said. They were debating it, dissecting it, asking what it meant for the future. And in the middle of all that noise, Karoline prepared to step back into the spotlight, ready to turn a single viral moment into something much bigger. Because as powerful as the exchange had been, the real question still lingered. How would she turn this surge of energy into a lasting movement? When Karoline stepped onto the post-debate stage to address the media, the energy in the room shifted again. Cameras swiveled toward her, lights flared, and the hush that fell over reporters was almost reverent. She didn't look triumphant or smug. She looked calm, steady, and deliberate, as if she understood that this moment wasn't just about her. It was about everyone watching who had ever been told to wait their turn. Her voice was soft at first, but it carried. Tonight wasn't about proving who's older or who's been in politics longer, she said, her tone measured but firm. It was about proving that every generation deserves a seat at the table. Not someday, not in a decade, but now. Those words rippled through the press gallery. For a moment, even the clicking of cameras slowed. This was not the fiery clash of minutes before. This was reflection. Karoline was framing the exchange not as a personal victory, but as a collective one. She paused just long enough for the weight of her words to settle. If we want an America that lasts, she continued, we have to make room for fresh ideas, for courage, for the people who will inherit what we build. Experience matters, yes, but so does vision. So does the willingness to listen. Reporters scribbled furiously. Her campaign team stood a little taller. And across social media, the clip of her remarks began to spread with equal speed as the debate moment itself. Not just because it was sharp or dramatic, but because it was hopeful. In living rooms across the country, parents nudged their children, saying, "This is why we vote." College students who had never attended a town hall began looking up voter registration deadlines. Immigrant families who had watched their kids grow up in a country that often questioned their belonging felt a quiet surge of pride. Karoline didn't stop there. She tied the moment back to something bigger, something timeless. "Hit subscribe if you have not still. The story of this country," she said, "has always been about passing the torch. Each generation faces doubt. Each generation is told they aren't ready. But each generation has stepped up, and that's why we're still here." The audience didn't erupt this time. They didn't need to. There was a different kind of power in the silence, the kind that means people are listening, thinking, imagining themselves in the story. And as she wrapped up, Karoline looked directly into the cameras, her expression steady, her words like a challenge and an invitation. "Tonight, we showed that respect isn't about age. It's about listening. It's about courage. And if we can keep that spirit alive, then maybe, just maybe, we can build a country worthy of the next generation." The moment felt like a closing scene, but also the opening of something new. Reporters later wrote that the room felt lighter when she left, as though she had reframed the entire debate not as a clash, but as a call to action. Outside, supporters gathered along the barricades, chanting her name, holding up handmade signs with phrases they just heard. This wasn't just applause. It was the first breath of a movement. And yet, as powerful as that moral crescendo felt, everyone knew the story wasn't over. The question now wasn't whether Karoline could win a single debate moment. It was whether she could turn this surge of momentum into a lasting political force. The nation was still watching, still waiting, and what came next could define not just the rest of the campaign but the shape of the country's future. As the cameras powered down and the debate stage emptied, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another campaign moment to scroll past. It was the kind of moment that leaves a mark, the kind that will be replayed and remembered. The crowd outside the hall was still buzzing, and online, clips of Karoline's calm takedown and inspiring message were already trending. Hashtags calling for courage and change were climbing to the top of social feeds. This is where the story turns from theirs to yours. Because whether you agreed with Karoline or not, whether you watched live or are catching up now, you were part of something that reminded America why debates matter. They are where ideas clash, where arrogance can be humbled, and where truth can rise. If this moment made you think, if it made you proud, if it made you sit up a little straighter, don't let it fade. Share it. Talk about it. Ask your friends what they think. Bring this conversation to your dinner table, your campus, your group chat. And if you believe, like millions do right now, that courage and respect should define the next generation of leadership, then this is your invitation. Hit subscribe. Stay with us. We're telling the stories that matter, the ones that remind us all that democracy isn't a spectator sport. Because tonight was more than a debate. It was a reminder that your voice can change the course of a nation. And the next chapter? Well, that's being written right now.